Hi, everyone again. It's me. So I wanted to just kind of start the conversation about the informal discussions. Um, Again, this is a kind of a new idea. It's hard to have an unmoderated discussion on this format, and it's hard just to kind of open it up and have us all kind of stare blankly at one another to get the conversation started. Small talk doesn't suit well for the format. That's why I thought I'd start with a suggestion. And this is one that was suggested to me by a session at the Central APA this year on teaching early modern philosophy. I don't know if any of you were at the Central APA and attended that session, but it's really, it raises a number of ideas about why it is that we continue to teach the history of philosophy, why it is that we think it's important that philosophers teach the history of philosophy rather than intellectual historians or people that are doing literature. So I wanted to throw this out there and let people kind of respond or say what they think, and we can kick the ideas around. If you want to just unmute yourself and talk, that's probably fine. If it gets unwieldy or unruly, we might want to reinstitute the hand raise function. But for now, I'll just open it up and let whoever wants to go unmute themselves and start. Thanks. Sorry, Raphael, you got your hand up.
Hello.
Oh, hey, did someone else want to jump
Go
in?
ahead, Raphael.
Okay, I guess I have a question about your question, or just a question that I often ask when thinking about this issue, which is that, does the history of philosophy have to justify itself in terms of its value for contemporary philosophy? Is that the main way we want to address that question?
So, I mean, sent to me, I think no. I think we can do whatever the hell we want. Programs and departments, often like my own, have a requirement for both undergraduates and graduates in the degree program. And we can think about it, why have that requirement, not one for aesthetics? So, but however you guys want to address the question is cool by me. Hassa, do you want to jump in?
Well, I'm not sure whether I have any well-considered thoughts, but of course the question is super interesting. So I would like to say something. Well, I have a maybe pragmatic approach towards this issue, because by studying history of philosophy, you actually see whether the theory you propose is original or has someone else proposed it already. And this is very often the case. Yes, I have been recently reading some dealing with cognitive scientists and neuroscientists, and they have some theories that historical philosophers have already proposed. And this kind of thing that actually you get to know that actually what is the significance of what you are saying. For this, you need history of philosophy to put your thoughts into context, because very often there are people who don't have very much background in history of philosophy, would think that they are proposing something great and original, like there are these people who want to reduce mind into brain, like this is very trendy nowadays in certain circles, and you see that all this has been discussed in the past. So simply, history of philosophy is essential that it gives the context of what you are doing, and it's not only, I think, important for philosophers, but fields in people in fields other than philosophy. Yeah. So this is like, I think for me this is kind of utilitarian justification that I would like to give to people when they when I want to justify myself.
Great, thanks. Alberto. You're muted, Alberto.
Yeah, guys, I hope you can hear me. Well, hi everyone, and I will say just regarding your question, I In my opinion, there are two reasons why it's important to study history of philosophy. The first is that it's essential for all students, and independently the major they choose, because it helps understand not just the development of a particular discipline like philosophy, but also, and probably more important, the development or history of human knowledge. I know that could be from a Western perspective, it's true, but finally, or in the end, it's our perspective. And the second consideration is among students, particularly among students of philosophy. I think studying history of philosophy is crucial for them, for having a good philosophical baggage. And with it, students can understand correctly many current philosophical problems and whose roots are found across all the history of philosophy. And without that baggage or culture, it's easy to misunderstand the problems, or at least the origin of some problems or some philosophical problems. So in my opinion, it's very important, the study of history of philosophy is what I want to share.
Great, thanks. And Michelle in the chat has a comment as well, saying whether we want to conceive of ourselves this way, it might be pragmatic to have an answer for those who think otherwise. And again, another really good reason to throw out there on the table. Any other kind of reactions to the initial question or its formulation?
I have one.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Colin.
Or Chris, why don't you go? You haven't talked yet.
I just wanted to ask Ben a question, because I think in your introduction or your introductory remarks about the question, you said just that it's important that philosophers teach this philosophy as opposed to intellectual historians. I'm just curious if you could say a little more about that, because I think one of the things that I sort of worry about often is that we sort of divorce the history of philosophy from the wider intellectual history. I think I don't remember who made the comment, who was speaking just a second ago, but did indicate sort of part of this sort of larger history of the development of knowledge. So I guess I'm wondering, what your thoughts about that distinction between sort of intellectual historians versus philosophy in this context might be.
No, thanks for that. So, I'm a contextualist. I practice contextualism, so I wouldn't want to divorce the two for sure. I want to use the results and even the techniques of intellectual history, history of ideas, as I can and need be. But when I went to graduate school, it was always kind of important that we're getting a philosophical education while we're specializing in history of philosophy. And that's kind of where my angle was coming from, was why is a philosophical education so important for what's distinctive about the practice? So that's where I'd want to kind of finesse the question. As far as I've got my own kind of answer and take on this, and it has to do with the fact that the philosophy is the object, and what it is that we're not only just working on text, we're working on ideas and philosophical arguments and philosophical visions, but also part of our ambit is to assess these things too, which we have to do from a philosophical perspective. But I'm sure there's others that have answers. And I hope everyone's got the chat open, because there's lots of action going on in the chat from Shoshana and Timothy. So take a look at that too. But please, someone else, Colin, you had something you wanted to throw into?
Yeah. So I appreciate kind of being a little bit more fine-grained and thinking about different kinds of justification for different kinds of audiences. And I think we want to be able to speak to many audiences. We should speak to them in ways. I'm almost like a little bit puzzled by people like contemporary philosophers who are skeptical about the value of history of philosophy, just because like we expect everyone to do research and to kind of like look at the literature from that their problem is coming out of. And if that process feels like totally continuous to the history of philosophy to me, like every single article references things that were written in the past, and then like where that blurs into like actual history of philosophy, I don't know, that doesn't seem like that important to me in a way. And then just in terms of thinking about how to justify these requirements for undergraduates specifically, I mean, a big part of what I think we should be doing in undergraduate education is just getting students excited about philosophy. And I think that like a lot of the history of philosophy is just really awesome and exciting and interesting to read, especially when it's like your first time going through it. So yeah, two slightly different thoughts going in different directions.
Yeah, and I think it's certainly, there's no reason why we have to be, one-dimensional, have one argument or one justification, right? I think it's got to be, I would think it's definitely multimodal. So coming at these different perspectives is great.
I also think there are a couple of questions here. Like one question is why study history of philosophy? Second question would be why study early modern philosophy specifically? And that's I think that's a different question altogether. And I think this was not come up by me, but I think might have, well, I can't remember who it was, but somebody had this very good answer to it. That's like early modern philosophy is a good thing to study because it is sort of this, like, it's the one of the last times when people still had people were still doing this like systematic philosophy. And they made these like full on philosophical systems that were trying to explain everything in the world. And the themes and the topics relate to each other very easily. So it's something that is easy to teach, easy to discuss. It's easy to compare. At the same time, it is distant, but it's closer. It's surprisingly close to us compared to scholastic or ancient philosophy. So it's something, it's distant, so we can compare it to ourselves, but it's not, at the same time, it's not too distant, so it doesn't really teach us anything about how we, or like it's something, it's not too distant to like, it's too distant to like really relate to us anymore. So it's something we can relate to, but it's still something that is distant. So I think that's a very good answer to that kind of a thing.
Oh, great, thanks. Raphael.
I just wanted to bring in Sue James's discussion of pleasure here. Part of, I think, what motivates her, she says, is that she's interested, not when she's doing history, not just in the pleasure of recognizing herself in the past, but the pleasure of exploring paths not taken. And I think when I'm defending the history of philosophy, I do often think about it just in terms of the joy of being hooked on a problem. And the other way of defending it, I think, is to talk about the imagination. Studying philosophies from other cultures, including past ones, is a way of broadening your imagination or provoking it. An example just on the top of my head, and this isn't a perfect one, is I think of some Peter Geach wrestling with the Trinity. The Trinity is such a bizarre philosophical problem, but still he said it for himself. How do you make sense of this very bizarre claim? But in trying to make sense of that, he came up with a lot of rich ideas. So in talking about the value of studying weird ideas from other cultures to a contemporary philosopher, that would be one example I'd point to.
Hasa.
Oh yes, thank you. Actually, there were several very interesting things mentioned. Like maybe I would like to continue what Jan was saying about this closeness of supposed closeness of early modern philosophy to current ways of thinking. Well, actually, my experience is that it's much easier to teach ancient philosophy. It's somehow more intuitive for students. If you teach early modern philosophy, you need to explain a lot more. So it's not as intuitive, and it's, at least I feel that students get some ancient philosophy easier. I have been trying to do both, so this is what I. However, what is, I think, especially worthwhile in early modern philosophy is that if we take this intellectual history into account, because many things that were taking place back then, like in early modern period, they are somehow reflected in what's happening today. All these religious conflicts, all these kind of issues about values of freedom, they're early modern issues basically, and they were discussed at that time. So for me, what has made me interested in early modern philosophy, and what keeps me interested, and what I hope keeps also people with whom I discuss this issue interested, is that these theories, even though they are sometimes extremely complex, like systems of Leibniz or Wolff, and also very counterintuitive, you can relate them to what is relevant for people now, by taking this intellectual history into account, because many problems that people had were very similar to today's problems, and many conflicts also. You find so many parallels. Like this is what we discovered like several years ago. We had here in Krakow a conference where we had the philosophers on one hand and political scientists on other hand, and historians, and there was some very much common ground, even though everyone was studying very different issues.
Great, thanks,
Yeah.
Hassa. I've got next, I've got Mark, and then Dylan, and then Shelley, and then Kenny. So Mark?
Yeah, okay. I see a couple of obstacles when you're trying to defend doing the history of philosophy. First of all, we made a distinction between two different ways of doing history of philosophy. One, Benjamin, you mentioned the contextualist way. I call it the historical history of philosophy, or I think Dan Garber calls it the fossil bed approach to philosophy. So there's that one. If you take that approach, which some of you are defending, this kind of historical, intellectual, kind of contextualist approach, then you have pressures, then you have the objection that, hey, psychologists don't need to do that. They don't need to know about the history of philosophy. Of psychology, and they can learn psychology. Why are you just, it'd be odd to study psychology and all you do is study the history of psychology? That makes no sense. Okay, so take another way of doing philosophy. You take Shoshana mentioned in the comments, the truth-seeking approach, which I call the philosophical history of philosophy. It's the way that Jonathan Bennett approaches history of philosophy, right? You really try to engage these topics, try to make them living, contemporaneous, or contemporary. But then you get you get this real pushback from colleagues in other disciplines saying, what, you're trying to seek the truth? Haven't you learned about postmodernity or something? You guys are living in this like Enlightenment, modernist, world. You have no, you're clueless. Wake up. You're living in the past. So I see those two pressures. No matter what, whatever way you do history of philosophy, you have to defend it against some objection or other. Usually, I don't have to defend it, but if it comes down to it, there are some significant problems here, and so it's a really good question that Benjamin is raising.
Great, thanks for that, Mark. Dylan.
Yeah, great. I've agreed with so much of what I've heard already. I just wanted to chime in on something I hadn't quite heard yet, but I think Mark just sort of touched it a little bit. Basically, this idea is that, hey, some of these figures might have gotten something right. That's why it's worth studying these guys. They could have got it right. So just wanted to say that.
Great, thanks, Dylan. Shelley, and then Kenny, and then Michaela.
Well, I guess one thing that, I've heard a lot of stuff and I agree with a lot of what a lot of people are saying. One thing I haven't heard, maybe I did, but I just want to emphasize or say something about is that it seems like justifying doing the history of philosophy, we're caught in the same kind of endeavor of having to justify any kind of humanistic endeavor. And that to me is, just is a function of the times, and it's a function of where education is now and so forth. I think to have to justify, so people have been talking about different audiences, and so I think to have to justify what we do within our own tradition, within philosophy, I think is just silly, frankly, that people even require us to do that. And so I don't, I think that, why would one not want to have people investigating their own tradition? And it goes back to Colin's point about, and somebody else made a comment, how far do you have to go back before you're tracing your tradition? Everybody, even who writes contemporary in in contemporary philosophy and philosophical problems and so forth, they're always referring to the conversation in which they are situating themselves, whether it's somebody who wrote something last month or whether it's somebody wrote something 10 or 20 years ago. So the fact that we specialize in a particular era, I think is a contribution in the sense of one investigates one's own tradition and writes about one's own tradition. I thought it was interesting, the comment, I think it was from Hassa perhaps, was it that, or somebody else, I'm not sure who, about ancient philosophy, and that, we're closer to early modern than we are to ancient. And I guess I might have to sort of just, if the point was early modern is more relevant than ancient, then in one respect perhaps, but I think ancient is just as relevant because I think it's important for people, human beings, to understand all of where they come from. And so studying ancient philosophy, even though we're closer in the modern sense, you know, with mechanism, with Newton, with all the science and all that stuff, still, I mean, it's a humanistic endeavor to understand human beings and human thought processes and where humans have been. And I think that I find with my students, just in the early modern era, when they find out that people actually thought like there were things like monads, you know, that people actually thought, you know, there's no material stuff, that people actually, you know, they're just like, oh my God, you know, that there are all these different underlying theories to try to explain the world that we live in. So I think that, I mean, I think we should, I do anyway, I try to think more about, or I wonder whether some of even having this kind of conversation and people asking us to justify what we do is, I always find myself very frustrated by that, just to be honest. I find myself personally frustrated to have to justify or to give any value, to try to explain to people why what I do has value. I mean, I think that anybody who's interested in any kind of, as I said, humanistic endeavor should just automatically realize the value of what we do. But perhaps I'm just being a little too cynical, so I'll stop there.
Thanks, Shelley. So let's hear from Kenny, and then I think everyone else has put their hand down. So let's let Kenny have the last word. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. Just in terms of like why we make our students study history of philosophy and how that is beneficial for students who might go on in contemporary philosophy, or for students who might not be having an academic career, you know, and maybe going out into the world. I think a lot of what's important there is somebody says something that seems obviously wrong to you, which is a thing that happens all the time when you're reading people across a cultural or historical divide. They say something that seems obviously wrong, and training in this activity of trying to figure out why that seemed right to them is hugely important for getting along in a divided world and also for engaging with contemporary philosophy. And when you do that, you need to both look at the context and look at the arguments, right? Because they're going to have arguments for some of their conclusions, but they're also going to have some basic premises that just seem right to them. And some of those might be the same as yours and some of them not. And I think doing this historically, often it can be a little bit lower stakes compared to people with which you might have really vehement disagreements about things that people are very divided about today. So you can have this kind of low stakes historical thing. Why did this person in the past say this crazy thing? And try to understand it, try to engage with it, and maybe engaging with it does change your own views, and maybe it doesn't. And I just think that's a really valuable activity to make students practice.
Thanks for that, Kenny. So unfortunately, we do got to kind of wrap up this informal session. I hope you guys found the format useful and interesting. The room will be open during the lunch break, so if people want to continue conversations, you guys can jump in and things like that. But we do want to take a little bit of break and move on to the next session. So I'll turn it over to Alistair. Thanks.
All right, so let's take 5 minutes, and then we'll come back with the session on Malebranche by Fabio. Everybody okay with that? So at 11:35 Pacific time, we'll be back.